Thank you, Thomas. There's sound now. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is me, Berto Frey 5. And you might have had a few seconds of no sound. I apologize. Today is a special day. In fact, let me get rid of something that doesn't need to be on the screen. Yeah, that's good. That's gone. And of course my stream looks frozen. Let's check if it really is. No, there it goes. Okay. Today is January 10th, 2019. 13 years ago today, the world lost a great man that the vast majority of people will have never heard of. And the man, of course, is the one in the pictures in the background, Sidney E. Frank. Sidney E. Frank owned and founded the Sidney Frank Importing Company. It was a liquor importer in Westchester, New York. It started in the, I believe, 70s, and it started with some smaller brands. They got a Gekkeikan sake, which actually is the most popular sake in the world, and it started making a bit of a name for itself. Then Mr. Frank himself, there were two Mr. Franks at the company, so we called him Sidney. Mr. Sidney was Sidney Frank, and his brother was Eugene Frank, or Gene Frank. So we did call them Mr. Sidney and Mr. Gene within the company to distinguish them, but for the purposes of this, Mr. Frank is Mr. Sidney Frank. Mr. Gene was also a remarkable man that I was happy to get to know in his final years. He was older than Sidney Frank, and he did pass away sooner. But that would be another video. Mr. Sidney Frank, he owned the company. He was a very special person. Eccentric is the word used to describe people like him, and those are people with big and unusual ideas, and also the money to be considered eccentric and not crazy. To be blunt. Is this the special day that we can ask for one favor? No, it is not the day of my daughter's wedding, Thomas Potts. I'm sorry. Mr. Frank, okay, so the story starts for me in the year 2000. I had, was just about to graduate college, hadn't quite graduated yet, and I was looking for a job, and my degree was in electrical engineering. And I had been going to all these types of places that I was not too fond of. Underwriter's Laboratory is a giant place on Long Island that hires electrical engineers by the scores and scores. And I went and I interviewed there, and it was non-stop cubicles for as far as the eye could see. And they were all engineers, and they all would come in, and yes, they did some pretty interesting stuff. Like Underwriters Laboratory is the UL mark that you test things until they break. So it would have been some fun designing tests to make electronics break, and you get to see all the newest electronics because they all need to be UL certified. So it didn't have no appeal, but just that sea of cubicles, it wasn't for me. Some other places I interviewed was another big company that made the equipment that almost all the cash registers used, the laser gun to scan the barcodes. I forget the exact name of the place, but there were companies like that, big companies with lots and lots of engineers, and I never questioned wanting to go into engineering, but to be honest, I wasn't feeling many of these jobs. It was the web. I mean, this was the year 2000, so it is not the internet that you know today, that we know today. Understand that. I put together my own website on I think I had 5 megabytes of disk space for my dial-up ISP I had from my house, bway.net. They're still an active internet service provider, but yeah, so it had dial-up at 5 megabytes of space, so I put a resume out there on the website. Now, Monster.com was relatively new at the time. I put a resume on Monster.com too, but I linked to the one on my website. Now, the one on my website was a little bit interactive, which was still relatively new in 2000. And I had a little picture of myself up in the corner of the screen of the resume, which became more common as time went on. But when you would mouse over my picture, it changed from the somewhat serious, professional looking picture I had that was actually a picture taken from my college ID to a fun picture that was taken at a family event where I had on giant sunglasses and was playing an inflatable saxophone. I would come to find out later that it was that picture, mouse over, more than anything else, that got me the interview at the Sidney Frank Importing Company. And the reason was they said when they saw that picture, they knew I had a sense of humor. And that a sense of humor was most definitely required for the job. And they were right. So I got a call saying, hey, this is the Sidney Frank Importing Company. Never heard of them. We're interested in interviewing you for the electrical engineering opening. I was like, great. I was used to dealing with these other companies who were like scheduling appointments a week out or 2 weeks out. And so I was like, when would you like me to come in? And I was told, oh, could you come in today? And it was kind of like halfway through the day already. I was nowhere near Westchester. I was like, I'm sorry, it's not really ready for today. I mean, I didn't do any research on the company. I was like, wow, they want me to come in today. That's kind of nuts. So we did it for the next morning. In the meantime, I went home. I did some research on the company. I think Google had existed by this point. I typed in Sidney Frank Importing. Of course, I spelled Sidney like Australia spelled Sidney. I wasn't familiar with the Sidney spelling as a person's name. And not much came up. But one newspaper article did come up where the person who wrote the article apparently also spelled it like Australia. But then they again, elsewhere in the article, spelt it correctly. So from that article, I got the correct spelling. Then I searched for the correct spelling and found more articles. To be honest, some of the news was not flattering. It would appear years before the company had been involved in the largest sexual harassment lawsuit settlement in New York State history at the time. But other than that, it told me that they imported Jägermeister herbal liqueur, and that the owner of the company had created the Jägermeister tap machine, which was a big refrigeration device that you would put on a bar back, and it would hold 3 bottles of Jägermeister, cool it down to below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and dispense shots colder than ice, as they were called. Now, I had some experience with thermal electric technology in my senior design classes and my later engineering classes, and I looked, you could bring up the schematic for the tap machine. I saw they were using a conventional refrigeration system, like your refrigerator would use. So I put in the back of my mind, you should ask about thermal electric technology, had they ever considered it. So I go in the next day for and guys, I see your comments. I will get to them when I can. I very much appreciate you guys being here. I do think this is going to be a little different than the sci-fi and the occasional politics. I think you're going to like it. I really do. I've got some videos that are going to be interesting, and I think the story is interesting. So please just bear with me. And it's going to be a little different than the usual show today. So in the back of my mind, I was like, you remember about thermoelectric stuff. The next morning, I go to the place to interview. They wanted me there early. So, okay, I get there. In the car, I come up, maybe 5 minutes before I was supposed to be there. And they let me in. And I'm not really sure exactly what I'm seeing. It's a small office building. The building has other businesses in it, but it's only 3 stories high, and it would appear the company I'm going to interview with takes up the entire 2nd floor. Later, I'd find out they also had part of the 3rd floor and part of the 1st, but at the time, I just saw they had the whole 2nd floor. Okay, fine. I go in, a woman and a guy meet me. They introduce themselves. They said, "You're going to interview with Mr. Frank today." I was like, "Mr. Frank of the Sidney Frank Importing Company?" Yes. Okay, I mean, that didn't mean anything to me at the time. I had no idea who Mr. Frank was or what I was getting myself into. So fine. So they said, just, be yourself and answer his questions. And they were like kind of preparing me for something like, don't freak out and don't run away, but without saying that. And I knew something was amiss, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So they opened these double doors and let me into his office. Sitting at the head of the table is Mr. Frank, wearing this pink sports jacket and bow tie, smoking one of those big cigars that way. Yeah, the cigar up there in the corner. Of course, it was completely illegal to be smoking indoors at this time already. I mean, that was a big no-no. You were not supposed to be smoking in a workplace, but he didn't care. And around the table, like out of a cartoon, perhaps, which was a long, elongated table, 15 to 17 other people, all of them looking right at me. And I come in. There was no chair. I was standing off to the side, and Mr. Frank looks at me. Says, "So you're the engineer?" I said, "Well, yes, I'm just graduating." And he was like, "Can you cook?" Oh, he says, "Di biase." It's Italian. Yeah. I was like, "Well, yeah." It's like, "So can you cook?" I was like, to be honest, not so much. I mean, I was like, I can make eggs and grilled cheese, but I'm not a big cook. He's like, "Wow." He's like, "Can you make sauce at least?" I was like, "Yeah, I could make sauce. In theory, I could make sauce." And he was like, he was not happy with those answers. It's like, "Do you play golf?" And I've never played golf in my life at that point. I still have never technically played golf. Not a game of golf. I've swung clubs. I've been to driving ranges. So I answered, "Well, mini golf." And he did not know what mini golf was. And one of his people came over and like whispered into his ear what mini golf was. And he again was not happy with the answer. So his third question: "Well, do you know anything about engineering?" And that is when I felt like, okay, this I can talk about. I was like, yes, I graduated. We're an accredited college or accredited school. I frankly graduated near the top of my class. I was looking into your, the company here that you do the Jägermeister tap machine. And I was wondering, had you ever considered thermoelectric technology? It might, I don't know all the specifications, but it's coming into its own, and it might be time to replace the, what do the refrigerators have? The condenser, or whatever that's called, with thermoelectric technology. He looks at me a little funny, and he hits a button on the phone, and he goes, "Renata." That was his secretary at the time. "Renata, Send up the other engineer. So about a minute or two later, another guy comes up. He's wearing a suit, and he comes in. Um, Looked like a typical engineer, I would say. And he sat down. I don't know, they found a seat for him. And he tells me, tell him what you told me. So I said to the guy, I was like, I saw that your Jägermeister tap machine still uses the refrigeration technology. Oh man, what is that word? What is it that refrigerators use? The air conditioners use? Condensers? What? No. The mechanical thing, the motor in it. That's whatever. They still use that technology. Have you ever considered thermoelectric? And he says, yes, we have. We've played with it. It's not there yet, but we've discussed it, and we spoke back and forth about some thermodynamic delta change in temperatures, delta T's, that were possible with the two technologies, and did some engineering speak for 2 minutes, and okay, the conversation stopped. So Sidney, Mr. Frank, asks the guy who was later I'd come to know as Mike, so does he know what he's talking about? Mike says, yes, Mr. Frank. Sidney, he would say Sidney. Yeah, Sidney, he seems to know what he's talking about. So Mr. Frank looks at me and says, great. Will you take the job? I was a little shocked because, we hadn't talked about salary or anything. I had been given no opportunity to ask any questions. It was completely baffling how I was already being offered a job after all the levels and levels of interviews I was going through at other places. And so I was honest. I said, I'm very happy to hear. I was like, but honestly, I have some questions. I need to talk it over with my family. And, is it okay I get back to you? And he did not seem happy, but he reluctantly said, yeah, it's okay. You get back to me. And then the same couple of people who brought me into the meeting brought me out and into their office. Well, an office. And they said, yeah, so here, fill out all this paperwork, please. And it's all paperwork that's saying I'm accepting the job. I was like, just to be clear, I said I needed a day, some time to talk about it and think about it, and Mr. Frank agreed with that. They're like, yeah, well, here's the thing. We told them you're taking the job, so just fill it out. And if you don't show up on Wednesday, then we know you changed your mind. But just fill it out as if you're taking it. And I was a little hesitant. But I was like, I guess. It's not like they can force me to show up if I didn't want it. If I changed my mind, I changed my mind. I was like, okay, but, well, what's the salary? And they're like, well, how much are you looking for? And I named a range, and they said the highest number of that range, and they said, that's fine. And I realized, wow, I guess I should have asked for more. And then on top of that, they said, oh, you also get a car allowance. So that bumped it up another few thousand a year. So I was tickled pink, so to say. Then they dropped on me that I would be expected to work 6 days a week. I was like, well, Saturday, which is when they also wanted me to come in, I was already had another job. I was doing teaching classes at my college for young students. It's called their continuing education department. But basically on weekends, I was teaching computer classes to, I don't know, second and third graders. Their parents would drop them off, and the college did weekend classes. So I was literally a teacher, not just once a week, but it was something. And that didn't end until the end of the year, so I was like, I'd have to, finish this other job. It's a prior commitment. And they said, well, that's fine. Then you could just come in on Sundays. Okay. So I was really going to be working 6 days a week, but it was for a good deal of money. I was happy. And that was fine. I ended up deciding to take the job. And the first few days was like a normal job. You get used to it. You're meeting the new people. And then came Sunday. And Sunday I came to the office, and the building is locked. Not a car in sight. No one. There was usually a security guard that was in the lobby of the building. Building is locked up. There's no security guard. There's nothing. So I call Jeff, who was one of the two people who brought me in and brought me to interview and told me that they were telling Mr. Frank I was going to take the job, and one of the only phone numbers for the other people I had. And I said, Jeff, it's Joe. It's like, I'm supposed to be at work here on Sunday. That's what I was told, but the office is locked up. It's closed. And he's like, the office? He's like, nobody told you report to the house on Sunday? It's like, the house? No, nobody told me. So he gave me directions from the office to the house, whatever that meant. And I drove. It was another 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes away. And I get there. And it is a large piece of land with a very old 1840s, I think it was, farmhouse on one half of the lot. And then a much newer looking building connected by a second story hallway to the older half of the house. And there's a third building that's just garages and some type of living quarters above that. And I go in the front door. I knock on the door. Nobody really answers, but the door is open. So I open the door, and there is the world's messiest kitchen. Previously, I would have thought my house's kitchen might have been the messiest. But no. This far, far exceeded anything I was prepared for. And it was narrow. And this was the main entrance, apparently, to the house. So I come in, and I'm seeing all strangers' faces. They're looking at me. I'm looking at them. Nobody looks familiar. I go through this. It's just a long hallway of kitchen, past the dining room, and finally past the dining room, there's a small office area, and finally in that small office area, one person looks familiar, a woman that had been with Mr. Frank early on in the office. Anyway, she tells me, "Oh, Joe, what are you doing here?" She was surprised. I was like, "Well, it's Sunday. Being I work on Saturday, they told me to just come in on Sundays." And she said, "Oh, you know what?" She's like, "You work on Saturday?" "Yeah." She's like, "So you're working every day of the week?" "Yes." She's like, "That's not right." She's like, "You shouldn't come in on Sundays." She's like, "Just keep your cell phone on you. We'll just move you to being on call. If he asks for you, we'll call you. But if he doesn't, then, you have the day off." It's like, really? I mean, this was amazing to me. I was getting my Sundays back. She's like, yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it. And I left. And I remember I was calling my dad. "Yeah, Dad, I got here. The building was locked. They sent me to a house. And then the person at the house said, I don't really need to be here on Sunday. They'll call me if they need me. And I guess I'm headed home." "Okay, fine." Months go by. And I was taking Sundays off. And Renata, his secretary, one day asked me, I don't know, "Are you going to the house on Sunday or something?" And I said, "No, I haven't been going to the house on Sunday since the first day. They told me not to go." She's like, "Who told you not to go?" I was like, it was the woman. I remembered her name. I told her name. She's like, "She told you not to go?" I was like, "Well, yes." She's like, "She's a golfer." I was like, "Well, it was my third day, Renata. I didn't know who she was. She just told me I didn't need to be there, and she was there. So I didn't go, and it seems like nobody's cared." So then I was like, "Fine." She's like, "You know what?" She didn't want to make this an issue, so she just decided that I only worked 5 days a week. I wasn't going to be a 6-day-a-week worker. I was like, okay, good. Worked out for me. The point, over the next few years, I got to know Mr. Frank very well. The entire reason he wanted an electrical engineer was because he had this vision of a liquor bottle that would light up and play videos. Like he pictured a bottle where the label would actually play a movie clip. You lift up the bottle, and on the label you would be seeing a movie. He loved watching movies. He had the biggest DVD collection you could imagine. When he passed away, I don't know if it was 3,000 or 6,000. He had some ridiculous 1,000 number of DVD titles. Basically, any DVD that came out, he had ordered for him. They had binders and binders and binders of that you would usually put audio CDs in, that they would put movies in, and the nurses, the people who were in charge of him day-to-day, his day-to-day care and putting stuff on the television for him, they would keep these big reports of every movie in alphabetical order and in what binder and what page of what binder each movie was in. so that he could say, I want to watch Lethal Weapon, and they knew where to find it. And yes, that was one of the movies he liked to watch. So I came in because he wanted this electrical bottle. I spent the better part of the first 2 years working on the project. Eventually realized that it was better to outsource most of the electrical work, engineering work, because his original goal, he actually brought me on under the plan of hiring 5 more engineers. And to be quite frank about it, no pun intended, there was very much 2 competing companies going on. I mean, Mr. Frank was the undisputed founder and CEO of the company at the time, but there was a more traditional management structure that controlled the day-to-day lives of the vast majority of the company, because the vast majority of the people didn't report to Mr. Frank directly like I did. The vast majority of people reported to supervisors and directors, who reported to vice presidents, who reported to executive vice presidents, who then reported to the top executive VP, who then reported to Mr. Frank. So it was a more traditional power structure, and as such, Mr. Frank didn't know everybody else by name in the company. Their loyalties were towards the people who had more control over them, their more immediate bosses and their bosses' bosses, which wasn't always Mr. Frank, although by and large everybody loved Mr. Frank. But I was in a special position where I was reporting directly to Mr. Frank. There's also a whole other story about him traveling to California half the year without telling me. And that was a last minute thing that came on to my job position, but that's a story for another day. What you need to know is that in the first couple of years, we actually got Qapla rum. That was his dream. That was the bottle I was hired for. Okay. We actually got Qapla rum out. Now, it didn't have a movie screen because the technology just wasn't there yet. I mean, this was 2000, 2001. This was before the first iPod video had even come out. iPods were still black and white screens at the time. So that's where the technology was. But what I was able to do is get an electroluminescent light, which is a paper-thin material that glows when it's hit with a alternating current. And we put some dancers in a oval, and each quadrant of the oval was its own light. And so when you lift up the bottle, one quadrant of the oval would light up, and it would go in a circle, and it would also play like a calypso music, island music to it, because it was a rum. So that was Qapla rum. And I wish I had a working bottle here, but the batteries have long since died. But you would lift up the bottle of Qapla rum, and it would play like a 30-second music clip, and the label would light up, and Mr. Frank was very happy with it. It wasn't the movie screen that he wanted, but it was the best we could do. We did a run of 100,000 bottles. And long story short, it was too expensive, and some of the bottles, frankly, did not work right. We had some quality control issues that were unavoidable, but he got out what he wanted. He got trade industry publicity. He was happy. I was happy. I mean, I worked on this project today, but years later, the company would call what position I had a brand manager. But at the time, they didn't have that. I was a special projects and product development engineer, but this project spanned multiple continents. I mean, we were getting the cork from Portugal. We were getting parts for the electronics from China. Assembly of the electronics were taking place in Mexico. The glass for the bottle was coming from Germany. And the rum and all these other pieces had to be delivered to Barbados, because the bottles were filled in Barbados. And we had to get the labels printed and the stickers made. And then all that stuff, and the boxes, the cardboard boxes. Everything was coming from somewhere else. And they all had to meet up in Barbados, and then they would be filled, packaged, and shipped up to a warehouse in New Jersey. It was epic. I was fresh out of college. I mean, this was my first real business experience, and man, it was a whopper. I was dealing with finances. I was dealing with legal issues. I was constantly going back and forth between company lawyers, the finance department. It was an incredible learning experience, and one I'll never forget. It gave me some insight into all facets of the business before I started settling in to more technology sort of things. After Qapla was over, of course, Mr. Frank still liked me. Everybody more or less liked me. I was working with the tap machine people. I was working with the office people. And I was working well with Mr. Frank's more personal staff. It was really the best of three worlds. And I was the only one in that position. Mr. Frank was the creator of Grey Goose vodka. Now, they had been importing Jägermeister for a decade plus by the time I came on board. But Grey Goose they owned outright. And they had only, they created in 1997. I started in September 2000. So it was a young brand by all accounts. But it was an incredibly fast-growing brand. For those of you too young to remember, or don't know, or don't care, in the United States, between 2000 and 2003, Grey Goose went from an obscure brand to the most popular alcohol brand, liquor brand out there. And it was just amazing. he would end up selling Grey Goose for over $2 billion to Bacardi in 2004. And that changed all of our lives. His, mine, the secretary, Renata, everyone who had been working there any amount of time, their lives were changed. And I will get to that right after I play this video. It's called It Tastes Like Money. Now, this was a few years before I met him. He went on, I believe it was C-SPAN, to do an interview about Jägermeister. And just so you see some of his personality, it's not a particularly long video, but watch it and just get a little sense of who he was.
A small importer who has joined us this morning. His name is Sidney Frank, and he is with Jägermeister Liquor. How many people drink it here in the United States?
Millions.
Millions?
Millions of people who drink it, especially in ski areas and surf areas. And I was just over at Aiken Gump, and I talked to one of the partners. He has 3 children that are 23, 25, and 27. They're all big Jägermeister fans. So I would say anything from 21 to 35, for some reason, they don't want to drink what their fathers and mothers were drinking. They like to drink Jägermeister. They don't really like to see it advertised.
And explain what Jägermeister liqueur is.
It's 56 herbs from Germany, and the 56 herbs, you know, herbs are a big thing here in the States. Now they're over $1 billion worth of herbs. And also the main thing when I think of what Jägermeister tastes like, to me it tastes like money because I'm making money on it.
And what is the proof?
It's 70 proof, which
It tastes like money. That was a saying we heard around the office quite a bit. I don't think he coined it that day, but it stuck with the company for a while. It's okay, Sassy. Oh, the camera. I'm gonna bring the camera back. So there's a little bit of who he was. Admittedly, a few years before I had come to know him. So 2004, Mr. Frank sells Grey Goose vodka to Bacardi for a sum that was in total of $2.2 billion. In fact, it wasn't only Grey Goose that was sold. They had also, there was also another brand, a gin, that was about to come out that was sold to Bacardi as well. But the gin Bacardi decided not to market because they didn't need any more competition for their own brand of gin. So unfortunately, what would have been a somewhat popular, maybe very popular brand of gin died before ever getting off the ground. But 2.2 billion. He was instantly on the Forbes 400 list of the richest people in the world. Yeah, closer to the bottom, but on it nonetheless. I think he was in the 300s somewhere. In fact, I remember I was like, I bet if I played his number in the daily lottery number drawing, I would win, because I had just come to realize that Sidney and money went hand in hand. Like there was something special about him that sucked in money. kind of. And sure enough, I went to the gas station and I played, and they're like, "Oh, do you want it for tonight or this afternoon?" Now, I had been very upset. I was like, this afternoon, right? New York State at that time had added a second daily drawing for the afternoon. And to be honest, I was like pissed at the state for doing that. I was like, no, that's bullshit. Give it to me for at night. I'm not going to give the state double my money for getting it for the afternoon and the night. You know what happened. Yes, the number came out boxed, not straight, but came out with the afternoon number. Had I played the afternoon, I would have come up with maybe a couple $1,000 off of, I don't know, $10 in tickets or something. So that's your lesson. If you have a good tip that you just know in your heart is going to win, I never again had that feeling, mind you. Play both. Play both the afternoon and the evening numbers. That was just a little aside. So Mr. Frank, being one of the most generous people in the world, gets $2 billion. He decides he's going to share this money with the employees of the company. I don't know, he talks with, I guess, some people in management, and they decide that anybody who's been there over a certain number of years was going to get, 2 or 3 times their salary as a bonus, as a one-time bonus from the sale of Grey Goose. People there, 2 years or whatever, would get up to 2 years would get a full year's salary as a bonus. People there, and I guess it was more than 2, I guess 4 years. 4 years would get a year's salary as a bonus. Like 8 years, because this company, had been going on since the 70s. There were people who had been there 10 plus years already. So some people got multiple times their salary as a bonus. Most people got at least 1 time their salary as a bonus, and everybody else got half their salary as a bonus, even if you were only there like 6 weeks. And then some special people, like the secretary I stated earlier, who had been Mr. Frank's secretary for a couple of decades, I think. Like, she was one of his first hires. So she put in quite a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. She was his right-hand man. Of course, she wasn't a man, but his right hand for the longest time. Took care of all types of things. She ended up with a cool $30 million. Yep, there were articles written about her. The highest paid secretary in the United States. $30 million from the sale of Grey Goose. And she didn't retire. She still worked for him for the next few years until he passed away. So it's not like it was $30 million and goodbye, good luck, enjoy your windfall. It was $30 million and I expect to see you back at work on Monday. And she did. She kept coming. She kept coming till he died, and then even after that, she kept coming until it was clear that powers that be did not need her anymore. So yeah, that happened. You could win, you could get $30 million and still go to work the next day, because I've seen it happen. And frankly, I would have too, because the stuff you would see at that office was more interesting than almost any amount of money you could imagine. There were days, so I told you earlier about how he would spend half the year in California. There was a growing distrust between his personal staff, well, really between the New York office people, which included Renata, and his traveling staff who traveled with him. And I was in that somewhat great position, but at times unenviable position of being kind of half and half of each. So there was more than once. Now, for whatever reason, Mr. Frank, obviously being a billionaire now, he liked to keep a lot of cash on him, because he would go out to restaurants and he would tip and tip and tip. Many people put their kids through college on Mr. Frank's tips. So he wanted lots of cash on him. Now, he had attorneys working for him that were with him 24/7 almost. You would think that if nothing else, they would set up a bank account in California and have his attorney, if nobody else was trusted, go to the bank, take money out, and bring it to the house, and he would have money, spending money for the week or a weekend or whatever. No, that was not what they did. Instead, Renata would get a number of small FedEx boxes, put $10,000 in cash into each box, and FedEx him to California, priority overnight. But sometimes you didn't trust who was going to receive the packages. So she would send them, because FedEx would pick them up at like 7 in the afternoon, 7 in the evening from our office. I mean, nobody knew it, but anybody could have walked into that building. It's stopped. I mean, he's since died, but it stopped. But for years, anybody could have walked into that building and walked out with 4 or 5 FedEx boxes, if they knew the label to look for, with $40,000 or $50,000 literally in their pockets. And yeah, there were some cameras, but the cameras, I mean, we caught people stealing things, but it was never enough to actually get a video of a positive ID of anybody. I mean, and if, God forbid, they'd put a mask on when they stepped out of the elevator or something, it would have been completely over with. So many opportunities to just walk that money out of the building. But nobody ever did, because nobody ever knew what happened, because nobody, being me, Renata, and maybe the other 1 or 2 people who knew what happened, ever said anything, because we were smart and we knew not to open our mouths while this stuff was happening. But anyway, so I would get on a plane that left JFK Airport in the evening, landed in San Diego in the early AM hours, get a rental car, drive directly up to Mr. Frank's house in Rancho Santa Fe, California, and be there for the delivery of the FedEx boxes. And then I could confirm with Renata over the phone, yes, we received 4 boxes, 5 boxes. These are the tracking numbers. Those are the ones you sent. Yes, they're here. I'm giving them to whatever nurse or whatever lawyer or whoever was there. And they would go into Mr. Frank's safe. And then they would pretty much be spent without anybody knowing where they were going after that. But at least they know the money got there. And then I would come home. Sometimes I'd stay out there. I mean, yeah, there were many times I spent weeks in California doing things. But more than once I flew out just to receive a FedEx box full of cash. And I would say, why are you sending cash? Just do a bank account. No, I don't trust them. I don't trust them. How do you not trust attorneys working for the man, but you trust FedEx? I don't know. But these were just normal days. These weren't even the abnormal days. So Mr. Frank got rich. All of his employees benefited. He decided he needed to do more. Not so much for the employees, but for the world. So Mr. Frank became a philanthropist. He had been one, but he kind of became an uber philanthropist. And one of the first places he donated money to was Brown University, a university he went to for 1 semester. He could afford 1 semester and nothing more, and so he went for 1 semester, was roommates with the person, the son and eventual president of RCA, which was a very good networking opportunity for him. But that was about it. And he couldn't afford to pay tuition anymore, so he left and he got a job fixing planes in India during World War II, which is another story. So Mr. Frank decided that nobody should have to leave Brown if they couldn't afford to pay. So he donated $100 billion, $100 million, not $100 billion. That's Dr. Evil money. $100 million to Brown University, the largest donation to a college or university at the time, to develop the Sidney Frank Scholars Program, where I don't know how many students would get a completely free, tuition-free education at Brown if they were a Sidney Frank scholar. He then donated another $20 million after Katrina hit, because Brown took in a bunch of students who were going to some universities that were hit hard by Katrina and they needed help paying. So he also funded a science building, a life sciences building at Brown. So he ended up giving over $120 million to Brown University. And Brown honored him back. We flew into Rhode Island on his... Now, he didn't own a plane. He preferred to charter them. And he would charter Warren Buffett's Boeing business jet. And I remember talking with Mr. Frank about, he's like, do you know what a BBJ is, a Boeing business jet? And I didn't. I was like, I don't know, is it like a Gulf Stream or something? which I knew from Microsoft Flight Simulator was like a little luxury jet. And he's like, it's like it, but it's a lot bigger. He kind of reminded me, and said there wasn't going to be a Star Trek in this, but there is no way not to make this comparison. He definitely reminded me a bit of the Grand Nagus from the Ferengi Deep Space Nine. Of course, the Grand Nagus was the epitome of greed, whereas Mr. Frank was the epitome of philanthropy. But they had similar tastes when it came to big and expensive things. And the voice is somewhat the same. I could definitely see Grand Nagus asking Quark, do you know the difference between this and this? And, yeah, it's like this, but it's a lot bigger. So he would charter Warren Buffett's BBJ. Why Warren Buffett? Because Warren Buffett was the only person who allowed smoking cigars on their multi-million dollar private jet. And Mr. Frank pretty much didn't go anywhere without smoking a cigar. So it was one of the few times I actually got to fly on the BBJ with him. Usually when he would go someplace, and we went through Bahamas for a month, Hawaii for a month, London for a couple of weeks, Dominican Republic, other places, San Francisco. I mean, he kind of lived in San Diego, but San Diego, Las Vegas, Orlando. I was on the team that would get there before him, because I had to usually set the places up for him. So I would usually come in before him, which means I didn't get to fly on his plane. I was often meeting his plane when it landed. But for this Rhode Island trip, there was no advance team, so I was lucky. I was actually on his plane. And it was a tremendous experience. We landed at the whatever airport in Rhode Island. There was a police escort to Brown University. It was their graduation day. And there was a parade in his honor. First, when we got to Brown, we set up in a room. Sassy girl. We set up in a room with a Jägermeister tap machine, a bunch of his stuff. I think it was the president's office. I think she gave him her office to use. It was big. We brought his chair that he liked. It was a reclining chair. So there's pictures of him like in fully reclined chair in this office at Brown with a Jägermeister tap machine, a whole bunch of company higher-ups, and Mr. Frank and his family around. Danny DeVito happened to have a daughter graduating that day, so he came up to see Mr. Frank in person. Anyway, that was kind of our staging area. From there, he had a golf cart. The rest of us walked. And there was this parade of like a mile of Brown students, the vast majority cheering Sidney Frank, because they were...
a small importer who has joined us this morning. His name is Sidney Frank.
Didn't mean to hit that one. Because they were just so happy. I mean, Brown really made him feel special. They gave him a honorary degree. In fact, they gave him an honorary doctorate for $120 million. You get the top degree they have. Anyway, this would have been 2005, I believe. Now, he passed away January 10th, 2006. So this was nearer the end of his life. And you'll hear. He literally calls this the happiest day of his life. And I honestly, I don't think he was. I don't think he was lying. I don't think he was pandering. If you see the emotions on his face, now he was not normally show that much emotion, but if you watch the emotions on his face, I think he really was. And while this plays, this is like 4.5 minutes. I will look through the comments and see if there's anything that needs immediate answers. But please watch this. It's important. And then after this, there's one more video, which is really cool. So this is Mr. Frank accepting his honorary degree at Brown University. I believe this would have been May of 2005.
Business leader and
That's the president of Brown at the time.
You are renowned for innovative thinking and hard work, and for your dedication to enhancing educational opportunities for students in need. Your success in the face of hardship, your consistent largesse and forward-looking ideals make you not only an embodiment of the American dream, but also a philanthropic role model. Your generosity to Brown will ameliorate for future students the fiscal hardships you suffered as a young freshman, for your magnificent support for undergraduate financial aid and academic most gratefully and lovingly honor you with the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters honoris causa.
Madam President, I have the honor to present for the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters honoris causa, Sidney E. Frank.
Doctores admitto, omniaque jura atque privilegia, ad gradum pertinentia tibi concedo, in huius testimonium hoc diploma tibi collegialiter trado.
I'm going to come up and see how you're doing. And this is the greatest day of my life. Leaving all
my money to a foundation which my daughter Kathy will run, and I hope and I'm sure she will remember Brown in future years. So this is not the last, and thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it wasn't for income tax purposes that the FedEx was used, because it was his money regardless what bank they withdrew it from. And yes, he definitely paid taxes in both states. I know that much. So Brown University was amazing. Also, as a result of becoming a billionaire, he kind of expanded his group of friends. I mean, and of course, lots of people came looking for money. One such person, I remember very clearly coming to Mr. Frank's house one day. In the weeks and months later, I would end up going to his house very often. In fact, became more of see, the thing with Mrs. Frank is, after a while, you just kind of became a friend more than an employee. So more than once, when I was just driving by his house, for whatever reason, I would just stop in and say hello. It could have been a Saturday, it could have been a Sunday, it could have been an evening. I didn't care. They didn't care. Everybody was happy, was friendly. Joe, nice to see you. Hi, how you doing? I remember I stopped in one evening. I was driving back from the Adirondacks property my family had, and frankly, I needed to use the bathroom before I had a vacuum. And I stopped and I came out, and one of the chefs was like, "Hey, Joe, you're here. Great. Mr. Frank wants to see if you want to come to dinner with us." I was like, "Oh, sure. Where are you guys going?" Some type of country club. I'd never been to a country club dinner before. It's like, okay, that sounds fine. Of course, we got there, and they're like, "You need a jacket." Not them, the country club people. I was like, "Oh." I was like, I only have I have a jacket, but not a dinner jacket, a jacket. They're like, "Well, let's see it." So I go to the car, I get like a black jacket, but it had a zipper. It was not what they were looking for. So they were looking. I'm a big guy. I was a big guy. Still was at the time, bigger than I am now, even. And they didn't have anything to fit me. So one of Mr. Frank's chefs was also a big guy, but not quite as big as me. But he gave me his jacket, which barely fit me, and took a house jacket, which barely fit him, so that we could eat dinner without Mr. Frank getting upset that somebody he wanted to come couldn't get in, because that was the type of thing you tried to avoid. You didn't want to make him upset. You just figured out a way to work around it, and you did, and it worked out. But that was the type of thing. I mean, at that point, I didn't know whether Mr. Frank was ever going to give, you didn't know. If he lived another 10 or 20 years, it was possible we might have all become rich. At the point he died, Mr. Frank was making plans to buy an island somewhere near Turks and Caicos and turn it into a private resort. And he was literally giving houses on the island to his friends and employees. Unfortunately, he passed away before the project. The project had started, but before ground was broken, so they never continued with it. But had he lived a few more years, it's possible we all would have had very lucrative pieces of property on a beautiful resort island. So I didn't know what the future held in store for me. I did know that thanks to his generosity, with the Grey Goose bonus, I was able to buy my house, which is where I still live. And in hindsight, I don't know what would have happened had I got sick and still lived in an apartment or in a smaller home. Because this isn't a huge home for New York City, but it is a single family home. Well, kind of a double family. It's got a second kitchen and apartment downstairs, but for now, it's being used as a single family home because nobody. Regardless, I couldn't imagine living somewhere else because this house, with the money I got from Mr. Frank and the money I was saving from my job, which always was paying good, and the Christmas bonuses, which were exceptional. The house, I put tens and tens of thousands of dollars of work into the house. Mr. Frank lived out of a bed, more or less. He did go into cars and go to golf courses and go into the office. But when he was at home, he was in his bed. In New York, it was a big bed where the head would go up, but a traditional bed. In California, he was literally in a hospital bed. And he had a table that he had me make for him. Actually, it wasn't a table, because it was an articulating arm connected to the wall. And he would come over his bed, and it had his telephone on it with a whole bunch of pre-programmed numbers. So you could just pick up the phone and hit Renata or Lawyer or Joe or whoever. So it was like maybe 20 or 30 numbers on this phone. You could pick it up and call anyone he wanted to. And yeah, that was, oh, you're an engineer, Joe, so you make that. Like, I'm an electrical engineer. Doesn't matter, engineer. You make this arm thing I've designed in my head. Okay, Mr. Frank, and I did. It wasn't the hardest thing in the world. It didn't look pretty, I'm going to be honest. But he was much more function over form. As long as it worked, he was happy, and it worked. So, but yes, so Mr. Frank lived in a hospital bed. The California house, he had rebuilt a brand new section of the house that was a combination bedroom, living room, dining room, and kitchen. All completely open, and that he could look this way and see the kitchen and the dining room and everything else, and the big TV, in fact 2 televisions in front of him. And off to this side was a little room with a toilet in it. So when he had to go to the bathroom, he just had to walk like 6 feet and he'd be at a toilet. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't realize it at the time, but my house right now, I opened my living room up I have a hospital bed. It is in my living room. The TV is in front of me. The kitchen is open. It's to the side of me. The dining room is to the side of me. I can see everything. It does not have the beautiful view of Rancho Santa Fe Valley that Mr. Frank's room had, but it is amazingly similar to Mr. Frank's setup. And I don't have an articulating arm. I do have a table that this laptop is on. So it is quite similar in hindsight to how Mr. Frank lived. So after Mr. Frank got rich, politicians, I mean, he had always given money to politicians. In the days before I knew him, apparently, him and Senator Al D'Amato were like friendly. He had bought like 1,000 copies of Senator D'Amato's book when it came out. His office was literally filled with cases of Al D'Amato books. For years after D'Amato was irrelevant, he still had these books to give away. It was kind of funny. But one of the people who came to his house was then Hillary Clinton, running for New York State Senate. And there's pictures of her leaning over his bed to get in the picture with him. And she has had Bill become his friend to, curry favor with him. So him and Bill Clinton would go golfing on a regular basis. And I have some stories about that. Yes, that is Bill Clinton driving Mr. Frank around in a golf course. What golf course is that? We will get into that in a little bit. But Bill Clinton travels with a staff, like Mr. Frank travels with a staff. Bill Clinton's staff are smart and very protective of Bill Clinton. They don't want to see him embarrass himself. One of the major no-nos for Bill Clinton, apparently, is that he's not to be taken photos of unless they've approved it. This is not one they've approved. Another one is that nobody is supposed to give him a adult magazine, shall we say. Well, Mr. Frank, now, one of Mr. Frank's companies was called Allstate Promotions, Inc. And they were the company that was just a modeling agency who hired Jaegerettes. Jaegerettes were mostly young women who would go to bars in skimpy Jägermeister costumes and promote and sell the brand to people at the bar. And bars would have nights where they'd put up promotions. The Jaegerettes will be here, Friday night or whatever, Saturday night, and the Jaegerettes would come in and give away a bunch of giveaways, merchandise, not alcohol, but Jägermeister t-shirts, Jägermeister keychains, whatever. They'd give the stuff away. They'd try to get people to try mixed drinks with Jägermeister. Anyway, there were some very attractive women. It was a modeling agency. And one of these women, besides being a Jaegerette, also apparently appeared in Playboy one month. Mr. Frank was quite happy. He was In fact, he was showing it off. Like he's like, look, one of my girls is in Playboy, and there was a month he had Playboy with him everywhere he went, and he was trying to show it off. And so he happened to go see Bill Clinton, and the Clinton people saw the Playboy and took it away. Like, absolutely not. He's not allowed. This is not allowed. Mr. Frank played it cool. Okay, fine. He then called one of his employees over and said, go back to the house, get another Playboy, put it in a yellow envelope, and bring it back here, and get back here as soon as possible. This employee went to the house, got another Playboy, put it in a manila envelope, wrote some nonsense on it, like sales reports, took it back to the country club, found them on the golf course, said, Mr. Frank, here is that sales report you wanted. Thank you. Opens the envelope next to Bill Clinton with his advisors out of the picture but never far away, and proceeds to open the Playboy and show Bill Clinton. He's like, that's one of my girls. Bill Clinton loved it. He was looking at it. He had no shame. No, this was the greatest thing. You could tell he did not get this type of, he did not get to see this as much as he wanted to. And the people didn't know what to do, because they could not come in and take it away from him because there were already cameras out. So they begged. They asked and they begged, and to my knowledge, I don't believe any of the pictures of Bill Clinton holding that Playboy ever got out. But they were taken. I don't have a copy. But I bet someone out there still does. But they gave their words, and yeah. So that was Bill. Bill Clinton, after Mr. Frank passed away, and now this is a whole other thing. Mr. Frank passed away January 10th, and our company had its sales meeting, its annual sales meeting, the very next week. And one of the staples of the sales meeting is that we would bring somebody famous in to speak. Sometimes it was, we had the amazing Kreskin once. Sometimes we had, what are those, promotional speakers, motivational speakers, yes, motivational speakers. But that year, when Mr. Frank passed away, we had Bill Clinton come to speak. And that was honestly an amazing night. And I don't know if we'll get to it today, but it's a story for another time. So who else did Mr. Frank play golf with? Well, Mr. Frank was playing golf with Bill Clinton, and they would play golf at a number of different golf courses. But as Thomas Potts has already surmised, I see, they were playing at Trump National. And Donald Trump would also play with Mr. Frank. And here is video of that. Trigger warning, this video contains Donald Trump, but 2005 Donald Trump, not 2016 Donald Trump. Right? 2005 Donald Trump, A-list celebrity. Nobody had a bad thing to say about him. Remember that. And now this was actually a promo, a news segment that ran on the Golf Channel at the time. They were doing a story on who Sidney Frank is, because among the people he had hired at all times, and this goes back to the original story, if you remember the 3 questions he asked when I interviewed: do I cook, do I play golf, and do I know anything about engineering? He asked those questions because Mr. Frank physically hated firing people. He fired almost no one. You had to steal a lot of money or a lot of stuff to get fired by Mr. Frank. They were very, very rare, but it did happen. And it hurt him. He did not like having to do it. So I realize now, Mr. Frank was asking if I cooked because, and this has happened, that he hired people for one thing, they didn't work out, and he made them chefs instead. And they hired people for other things, and they didn't work out, so he made them golfers instead. So he was just seeing, did he have any outs with me if I didn't work out as an engineer? Could I become a chef on staff? Could I become a golfer to golf with him? Unfortunately for me, I mean, the answers were no, but luckily I worked out anyway. So yes, Mr. Frank had a number of people he paid to golf for him, and with him initially, but then for him later on, as this video will explain. Most of them were pro golfers, and then he went and got some amateur golfers. And by the way, just because I see it's in the video right now, this shirt, if you notice, WSWA 2001, Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association 2001. This was an event that took place in San Francisco. Mr. Frank had these shirts custom made with bow ties, his pink bow tie on the shirts. He wanted us all to wear these shirts. This was a business event. Other people were in business attire. Many people were in suits. Most people had ties. The Sidney Frank staff were wearing black t-shirts with pink bow ties. And though you're not going to be able to see it, Mr. Frank's face from that picture behind me on the back of the t-shirt. So yes, this t-shirt is from April 2001. It is an 18-year-old t-shirt. It's been worn twice. It was worn that day at WSWA 2001, and I'm wearing it again today. That's it. So yes, it's a special shirt. Where was I? The golf courses. Yes, Trump. So yes, so remember, that is the Trump we are talking about. This video was, I believe, like October 2005. So the last 3 months of his life or so. Well, actually, it aired in October. I think it was taken a month or so earlier. You'll see the grass is still green. The trees still have leaves on them. But Yeah. So watch this, and then we'll come back. I'll look at the comments again in the meantime, like I did last time.
Welcome back to PGA Tour Sunday. That, of course, Donald Trump on the links of Trump National in Westchester, New York. That's where Donald hosts some of the world's richest and most powerful people. And recently I had the honor of going along as he welcomed fellow billionaire Sidney Frank. Just who is Sidney Frank? Well, you're about to find out. Another beautiful morning in Westchester County, New York. And fittingly so, because today Sidney Frank is hitting the links.
Hi, how are you? Well, I am in agreement with God that while Sidney Frank is on the golf course, it doesn't rain. And it's always seemed to come true. And I also asked God to make me very rich, so he made me a billionaire.
What is it about the game of golf that you love?
It's a game you can play all your life and you can learn all your life.
Each morning, the 85-year-old is helped into his $400,000 bulletproof Mercedes Maybach and heads to the golf course, often with former Nationwide Tour player and personal golf professional Jeff Fujimoto by his side. In fact, Sidney Frank has his own golf team, 3 pros and 8 amateurs, and on this day, the squad is playing at Trump National in Westchester.
You say he's hitting it pretty good. So I assume that Pat and I are probably going to be partners against Donald and Jonathan.
That's right.
The Donald they speak of is none other than the Donald himself.
For all these other big givers and big talkers, this is the man right here.
So who is this man? This man that even Donald Trump looks up to. Sidney Frank is a liquor baron and promotional genius who single-handedly turned Jägermeister into one of the best-selling imported liquors in the United States. But his biggest idea didn't come until much later in life, in the form of the recently credited best-tasting vodka in the world.
The story is I was 75 years old when I thought of Grey Goose. And in 7 years, I created it, marketed it, and sold it to Bacardi for $2 billion.
That kind of money allows you the freedom to do what you want, and Sidney wants to go golfing. But his playing days ended when, as he says, his wife started out driving him. So now he rides 18 holes a day in a golf cart, golfing vicariously through the pros and amateurs of Team Frank, enjoying the outdoors and the sport he loves most.
You got it.
Oh, I didn't get it. Not hard enough.
Good putt. Thank you.
Sidney spends at least $500,000 a year on his little golf habit. The team travels the country and beyond, playing some of the finest courses imaginable, with Mr. Frank as their coach, their teacher, and their mentor.
Yes, sir.
I think a baby 9 with a cousin.
Do they ever disagree with you when you suggest a club?
No, we talk it over. Usually they agree with me because I'm right almost every time.
He tells you to hit shots that you're not necessarily comfortable with, but it's good in the end. You sometimes look back and say, wow, he was right. I mean, you learn a lot from him, so he knows what he's talking about.
Gets him in the mix with everybody's golf game, and it keeps him excited. And then if these guys hit a good shot, he's really pumped. He's definitely opened a lot of doors for all of us.
Sidney molds his men to someday excel on the PGA Tour, but his biggest lesson has nothing to do with golf. It's one even Donald Trump takes to heart.
It's good to be with you, Sidney.
Yeah, nice to be with you, Donald.
He's just a very special guy who's the most generous man I think I've met.
Really?
He's very generous, and you know, he's a believer more than anybody in putting back and giving back to society, and that's great.
So poor he had to drop out of Brown University after his freshman year in 1942, Sidney wanted to make sure other students wouldn't suffer the same fate. So he donated $100 million in financial aid to the poorest of students. In return, Brown paid him back.
2 miles of 8,000 students cheering Sidney Frank. You know, that's unbelievable. This is the greatest day of my life.
And Sidney Frank's charitable giving continues. Just this week, he donated $5 million to Brown University's Hurricane Katrina Relief Fund. And one more funny note about his giving. Before amateurs joined Team Frank and it was just pros, Sidney was known to just hand out cash on the golf course. 100 for a birdie, 500 for an eagle. You'd have funny contests like whoever had the whitest teeth got 100 or the highest socks. But since amateurs in their group, now he doesn't do that anymore. Fran, though, I did use Crest white strips before I went there to do the story. Still, though, didn't walk away with any cash. Maybe next time.
That's right. Well, good luck next time. All right.
If you see that picture above me over there, Sidney and Gwyneth Paltrow, you saw it in that video too, I believe. Interesting thing about that picture, I honestly did not notice it until today. But if you'll see, there's this no, I don't know what to put it, but you'll see this. There's this man on the left side of the picture. His head is cropped out. I actually have the full photo pre-cropped on my computer, and I saw it today, and I had never known who the man was because I didn't know who these people were. But now it's quite clear who happened to photobomb Mr. Frank and Gwyneth Paltrow. None other than Harvey Weinstein. Yes, that is Harvey Weinstein, now infamous, looking in the general direction of Gwyneth Paltrow's rear end. Luckily, Mr. Frank's hands are in a safe spot in this picture. Nobody can accuse him of inappropriate touching in this picture. So, yeah, I just thought it was kind of hilarious today, recognizing him. I'd seen this picture dozens of times over the years, never knowing who he was, just some random guy in the background to me. But no, today popped right out who he was. So, yeah, that's kind of weird. So, where do we go from here? You could tell in that last video, Mr. Frank was not doing the best. He was not the healthiest person in the world. He actually had his first heart attack years before I started working there for him. He had even before he became a billionaire, he had a team of full-time nurses to help him, to take care of him. Yeah, he was married, but it wasn't a traditional marriage. I don't want to get into the details, but suffice to say they slept in their own separate bedrooms. And Mr. Frank always had a nurse around, literally at his beck and call. A few steps away in one house and a few steps away in another. They had baby monitors so they could monitor him. If he called for them, they'd come running over. When he traveled with at least 2 nurses and usually a doctor. He had several doctors on the payroll. My doctor, my primary care doctor, was an employee of Mr. Frank for the longest time. And it was great because I could just go there and he would, I'm not going to say he saw me ahead of other patients, but he saw me ahead of other patients because he knew I had to get back to work, and Mr. Frank was helping pay his salary. So yes, we kind of got a little special treatment. But hey, it was a benefit of working for the company. So he had more than one doctor on payroll. So he would travel. He would travel with nurses, with doctors, with the paddles, the resuscitation units, at all times. And at the end of 2005, November, December 2005, it was clear Mr. Frank needed heart surgery. And he needed a valve repaired. And now he had been in and out of the hospital in San Diego for a bit. And so coming into December, we knew he needed this surgery. The earliest he could get the surgery was literally, I think, the day after Christmas. And it was in Germany, because the procedure he wanted was still experimental. It wasn't available in the United States yet. And so we were going to Germany. We had all booked tickets. We had booked hotel rooms. We had booked rental cars. Now, it was going to be the first Christmas I was going to miss with my family. And I was torn by it. He actually was kind enough to tell people he knew it was Christmas time, and the offer was open. The people who were married and married with kids, they could bring their wives and their kids, or their husbands and their kids, along with them. That wasn't even a question. But he also, if anybody else wanted to bring a family member with them or something, that would have been okay. He was okay with that. He understood people had family. And he was generous like that. I kind of feel weird about it, because at first I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to have to spend Christmas in Germany. But the more I thought about it, and the financial realization that Mr. Frank, the difference he was making in our lives at that point, I said, you know what? If I have to spend every Christmas in Germany, but it means Mr. Frank is alive, it was a trade-off I was willing to make. I was trying to learn German desperately, because I had absolutely no understanding of German. And unlike all the other places we had gone before, while I'm sure a number of people spoke English, I didn't think the majority of people did. And I would have been in a real tight position to not know any German. But with like a week to go, they canceled the trip, because it turned out he could get the same surgery in Vancouver, Canada, but it would be like mid-January. So they canceled the trip. I was actually initially relieved. I was also worried that, the plane trip from San Diego to Germany might have been tough on Mr. Frank, Christmas time or not. And the trip from San Diego to Vancouver was obviously a lot less than San Diego to Germany, or even New York to Germany. So we had Christmas with our families, and then I headed off to Canada. And now I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, because I will probably do it another day. But I literally wrote out a couple of journal entries because the next 2 weeks of my life, the 2 weeks from the time I went to Canada to the time after our sales meeting, which was the middle of January, and after Bill Clinton spoke, and I actually had to follow Bill Clinton on stage in front of the entire company. Yes, I mean, imagine having to follow the Bill Clinton on stage. That was me. I followed Bill Clinton, finished and left, and it was me up on stage to bring in the final goodbye to Mr. Frank. And I was like, wow. Any other day you told me I was following Bill Clinton, I would have ran away. But that day I knew it didn't matter. I still won the day. But those 2 weeks, from the time I landed in Canada until the time we buried Mr. Frank, and then had the sales meeting, and then had our goodbyes, and then I came home from the sales meeting. My back was killing me. My back was as bad as Anti-Tracker's back has ever been. I was hurting. I was so tired. I was 13 years younger, so I could still take it. But man, it was a lot. But I had the good sense to write things down twice. Once after we buried Mr. Frank, and another once we were done with the sales meeting, just to remember in detail what happened. I've read them over a couple of times. I've edited them to a form that if I ever wanted to publish, I'd feel safe doing so. I mean, there are still some family, I don't want to say secrets, but personal details. I mean, because much of his family is still alive. There are personal details that really don't need to be released. So there were some edits and whatnot. I try not to use people's real names who don't need to be brought up by name. Things like that. So that is something I think we'll do another day. But just so you know, I landed in Canada, in Vancouver. I assume either late on the 8th or early on the 9th. Anyway, he was staying at this beautiful hotel right on the water in Vancouver. I forget the name, but it was called like the World Trade Center Canada or something like that. It was a super fancy luxury hotel. He had like the penthouse of the hotel, an entire wall overlooking whatever sound that is next to Vancouver. Hands down, the most beautiful natural sight I had seen yet with Mr. Frank in my travels. I mean, there were seaplanes landing, beautiful snow-covered mountains in the distance, layers of clouds and fog and so natural northwest beauty that could not be rivaled. And the hotel is working around the clock to get the room set up to Mr. Frank's specifications, which at this point in his life meant no tiles. The nurses were far too afraid he would slip and fall on tiles, so they had literally people carpeting over all the tiles, including the bathroom, the hallways, anywhere in the room that would have had tiling. They were carpeting over. It didn't matter that the carpet was going to be pulled up as soon as Mr. Frank left. They were doing a good job at it. They didn't want to make it look like garbage. So yeah, I mean, it took a day. And I had to come. Now, Mr. Frank got used to watching his home television while he traveled. At the end, he had Slingbox, which was a thing you could hook up to your TV at home that broadcast your television channel wherever you were when you traveled. He loved it. He loved it. But before Slingbox, Sony had their own similar device. Not as fancy. And before that, I would literally just bring a tuner with me, and we would go to hotels. Like if you went to like a Marriott hotel and you put your own tuner into the coax cable that would go into the back of a Marriott television, and then you ran the signal out of the converter box, you could get free movies, because those movies that you would order in your hotel room would actually just be playing on some other channel. And all you needed to get to these movies and adult films was a converter box. I stumbled upon this by accident, but Mr. Frank loved it. He loved it. Oh, and he couldn't deal with the 36-inch television that the hotels had, because he had a 71-inch television in 2005. He had two 71-inch televisions in his New York bedroom, and in his San Diego bedroom he had one 71-inch and one 46-inch on an arm, because there just wasn't room for two 71-inch televisions. They were $10,000 Sony televisions, the biggest you could buy at the time. He loved big screens. So when we traveled, we couldn't bring a giant screen television, but we could bring a projector and a projection screen. So like I would go and I would set up a big projection screen. I would set up a multi-$1,000 projector, and I would set up a Slingbox or a laptop, or depending on the hotel, a converter box, and hook it up so that the nurses could put this TV on the big screen and he could watch it, and he loved that. In Hawaii, he rented the island of Lanai. That was where Bill and Melinda Gates rented the entire island to have their wedding out. They had rented the entire island out to have their wedding. Mr. Frank rented out the biggest hotel. There's only 2 hotels on the island. He had the super presidential suite, but since he wasn't coming for a day, I got there first. I got to sleep in the presidential suite the first night. And I had this giant TV set up, and I was watching Futurama from a Slingbox I had set up in my apartment, and I was watching it in Hawaii in a presidential suite that literally included its own butler. Its own butler. I had a butler for a night, a butler. I didn't ask him to do anything because I felt weird. But the room came with a butler. And I was sleeping in the bed watching Futurama, looking out over this vast, beautiful pool. And in the distance, you could see the dolphins in the ocean. The dolphins were playing in the ocean in view of the hotel room. even when I went to my regular room after he came, it still had a beautiful view. And there were still dolphins. It wasn't as big, it wasn't as nice, and there wasn't a butler. But man, it was a beautiful, beautiful hotel room. A beautiful experience. So, okay, so I was no stranger to fancy hotels at this point. So I landed, and like some other people landed with me early, a couple of chefs, one of the other nurses, one of the security people, because he had private security. He had nurses, he had chefs, he had golfers, he had all types of people. One of the security people was driving his bulletproof Maybach from California, from San Diego, up to... He had 2 bulletproof Maybachs, because when you have one Maybach, you need a spare, because apparently those cars always need servicing. One was almost always in the shop. So they drove one of the Maybachs up to Vancouver from San Diego, filled with junk. Not junk, but stuff he likes to have with him. So we were up there on the, I call, advanced team, getting this hotel room ready. And Mr. Frank was flying out of San like Airport at like 10 a.m. San Diego time. And he was due to land, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 p.m. Or so Vancouver time. And it started off like any normal day. And then we started getting pages. Yes, pagers. Pages to our pagers. That didn't make a lot of sense. The plane made an emergency landing in San Francisco. Medical emergency landing is all we saw. We're trying to find out what's going on. The New York office has no idea what's going on. We're trying to just call people we know on the plane. Finally, I get through to one of his attorneys who was with him, and the man is just crying. And he can't talk. He's just crying. And I knew at that point, without a doubt, what that meant. I called the other employees over, and I broke the news. I didn't have any instructions yet, but Mr. Frank had clearly passed away en route on the airplane to Vancouver. As another hour or so went by, we got hold of the New York office. We got confirmation that, yes, he did pass. We were told to get back to San Diego as soon as possible. There was only one flight left that day that could get us back from Vancouver to San Diego, and it went through, it had a stopover in Vegas. So we booked it. I tried to tell the guys at the hotel that, listen, they're still going to get paid, I'm sure, but the guy is dead, he's not coming. You could probably stop carpeting this giant bathroom. They didn't care. They said, thank you, but we were paid to do the job, so we have to do the job. So they kept on carpeting even after Mr. Frank passed. We told the hotel what happened, and they were like, I'm like, listen, I don't know, but I mean, I don't think nobody's gonna. You're still gonna get paid. Obviously, we were here. Things are happening. You deal with our office, but I'm sure they'll make it right. We left so much stuff behind because we had no way of getting it back. We loaded everything we could into the Avalanche, but we just left, not Avalanche, the Maybach, into the Maybach, and that wasn't room for everything. I mean, we had $5,000 video cameras, we had $5,000 projectors, all types of things that we tried to put in. The cheaper stuff we just left in the room. We didn't care about. They ended up just probably being lost or given away because it didn't matter. We just needed to get back to San Diego. They were flying the body back to San Diego. We knew that much. We get to the airport, and at the airport, although I had seen his face, I had never spoken to him much in person, was Mr. Frank's son-in-law. And I was trying to tell him what happened, and he apparently he knew. He was talking to Mr. Frank's daughter, and how he was talking on a payphone. Now, granted, in 2006, payphones were rare, but they still existed. And I said, if you want, we have extra cell phone. You're welcome to use it. He said, thanks, but no thanks. He was happier to use the payphone. I asked if he wanted help getting a plane ride back. He said no. He'd figure it out. So, okay. So we all the employees, we did a shot at the airport bar for Mr. Frank. We were in some sort of disbelief. We flew to Vegas, and one of the younger guys, had never been to Las Vegas before. So one of the other guys, now I'd been to Vegas a few times by this point. One of the other guys, and we had like an hour and a half before the next flight. So one of the other guys took the guy out in a taxi just so he could go up and down the strip just to say he's been to Vegas, because to be completely honest, at this point in their lives, a lot of people were not sure what they were going to do. They knew they were never going to get a job that paid as much as they were making for Mr. Frank again. To see Vegas in a time when you're not sure you would ever come out again, be able to see Vegas again, it was something. So I don't blame the guy for doing it. I'm shocked he had the energy to. But that's what they did. And then we flew to San Diego. Now, we got into San Diego so late that the hotel that I loved, that was the hotel I used to always go to, the Residence Inn in La Jolla, was booked solid. I went there, they're like, sorry, we don't have a room for you. I was like, God damn it. I don't know what was happening. Something was happening at Del Mar Racetrack that like all the rooms were booked. I found a shitty Hilton in Del Mar that still had a few rooms left because it was such I'm not going to say it was a rundown dump, because I mean, I've been to worse hotels, but I haven't been to worse hotels in Southern California. Interstate hotels in rural Arizona are one thing. These hotels in the richest areas of Southern California, you expect more. They didn't have room service. They didn't have a mini fridge. They didn't have a vending machine, for Christ's sakes. I was just thirsty as all heck. I ended up leaving the hotel like 1 in the morning, just trying to find a place to buy a bottle of water. I went to a gas station nearby. The gas station was open, but the doors had yellow tape over them because somebody was buffing the floors, and they didn't want anybody to walk in. I was begging the guy. I was like, "Guy, please, sir, I just need a bottle of water or two. I've been traveling all day. I don't know what else to do." I was like, "I will throw you a $10 bill. Just please roll to me a couple of bottles of water." And he did. I threw him a $10 bill because I couldn't cross the floor and he couldn't come close to me because that section of the floor was still wet or something. I threw him money and he rolled some bottles over to me. I was so happy. They were big bottles. I drank and I went back to the hotel with my 2 bottles of water, and I tried my best to sleep, but man, that was one very uncomfortable bed. But I managed to get some sleep. The next day, Mr. Frank was Jewish. So in their religion, they try to bury early. But he was going to come back to New York before he was buried. So the next day in San Diego, we had a service for him at a temple in San Diego that was just his family and I'll say his friends and his close personal staff. That was his kind of first and real service. After that, we all went to dinner. And after that, we had to get all these people to New York the next day. I believe it was me who jokingly said to Renata at one point, "Why don't we rent an entire JetBlue plane?" Yes, it was me. My mother worked for JetBlue at the time. I asked her, "Do you guys rent planes?" And she said, "Actually, we do. We just started." So I'm joking about Renata. I was like, "Why don't we rent an entire JetBlue plane?" Now, this is an A320. It held about 150 people. Let's rent, because it was more than could fit on the BBJ by far, but not 150 people. I mean, maybe there was 30 people. And she was like, she loved the idea. So next thing we know, they have a JetBlue jet ready for us to take off at like, I don't know, 9:30 that night or something. Now we couldn't meet them at the regular terminal in the airport. We had to go through the private terminal that the private planes used. Of course, Mom didn't get credit for it because once I told Renata, she told the head of security, and the head of security knew a friend who worked at JetBlue, so they did it through that guy. Whatever, it didn't matter. But we had a JetBlue plane. We had eaten at a restaurant Mr. Frank liked to eat at. I went in the car and took a small nap. I was not hungry. I was just still so tired. I wake up to the cell phone ringing, and they're like, "Hello?" I'm like, "Hello," and it's New York, and they're like, "Yeah, are you guys at the plane yet?" I was like, "What? Plane?" What are you talking about? It's only, and I look at the time, I was like, shit. I had to go into the restaurant, get everyone out. We were way behind. Way behind. We beeline it for the executive airport. We get on this empty JetBlue plane. JetBlue knew what they were doing. They did not send their usual array of flight attendants. They sent particularly flight attendants with a personality that was welcoming, and they had brought like 3 or 4 pizzas on board. They didn't know if we had eaten or not, and we had tons of Jägermeister on the flight, and it was raunchy. You can't imagine, because these people had nothing left to lose. They were drinking and eating pizza. Drinking, I mean, they got on the PA system. They were making announcements. The pilot came out to talk to us. We tried to get the pilot to take shots. I don't know why, but thank God he refused. He did refuse. I have to give him props. He's like, no, I can't drink. I'm flying the plane. Man, I don't know what we were thinking, but yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. The plane lands in LaGuardia. Everyone else is going to a hotel, but I'm the only one on this plane that lived in New York. And my apartment was maybe 15 minutes from LaGuardia Airport. And was it an apartment or was it a house at this point? My house at this point was 15 minutes from LaGuardia. And they all left, and I came home, and I just collapsed. And I think that's probably when I wrote the first of the 2 like journal entries. It was crazy. The next day, or that night, I forget. I went into work, and we had buses big buses busing the entire office staff, probably 100 plus people, from New Rochelle to a giant temple in Manhattan, where they were holding a second service for him. Now, the New York service was the one where there were hundreds and hundreds of people, famous people, employees who were long since fired or quit. Everybody was lining up. Everybody who had heard about it. All types of people were there. Donald Trump didn't go. I kind of held it against him for a while. Like, you were on this video a few months ago saying how much you look up to the guy and you don't come to his funeral. Although in hindsight, I do think he didn't come because he did not want to be the center of attention. But who knows? But yeah, I was kind of annoyed for a while at that. But so many other people came, and the family asked me to videotape it. I felt really weird videotaping a funeral service. But once I started doing it, it was exactly what I would have done any other time. I had recorded Mr. Frank at so many other places. I did the recording at Brown University. I did the recording in England when he was visiting the Royal Science Museum and the place where Churchill, the bunker where Churchill was giving commands during World War II, the underground bunker. Churchill's grandson and great-grandson were giving us tours. I recorded that. I did recordings in Barbados and the Bahamas and all kinds of places. So yeah, I was kind of like the cameraman among my many job hats. So yeah, it felt okay to do one last recording of him. And then we said our goodbyes. And the family alone went with him and maybe a couple of top execs where he was buried. I believe he was actually buried with his first wife. I'm not 100% sure. But he's not buried in New York and he's not buried in California. Don't worry about where he's buried, but unfortunately I've never been to the grave site. I would have liked to have gone at some point, maybe one day, but to me, grave sites, I don't pay a lot of meaning to grave sites. The spirit of the person I know is with me much more than having to visit a grave site. And yeah. So there is so much more to tell. But I'm sure you guys, even if you like the story, are getting tired of hearing about Mr. Frank. He was an amazing man. He was a good friend. Had he still been alive when I got sick, I have no doubt he would have found a way to have doctors do something that I would be walking or something today. He just did not take no for an answer, and he had the money to back it up. But I am blessed to have known him for the years I did. Not just him. He amassed such a collection of the people who worked for him, both personally and in the New York office and around the country. They were truly, and it's a cliche, but they were the best of the best. Almost without exception, they were the friendliest, nicest, and smartest group of people you can imagine. They were all excellent at their jobs. The couple of people along the way who weren't didn't stay long, but yeah, it was an amazing company that he built, an amazing legacy. He had hoped that his legacy would continue in what he called the Sidney E. Frank Foundation, which is where he left the bulk of his money to after he passed away. While the Sidney E. Frank Foundation lives, the reality is I don't know that it's doing the things he would have wanted it to do. It's not my call to say what that is. He left a certain person in charge and he had total faith in them. So, you know what? I understand their decision. I'm not saying their decisions are bad. I'm just saying I don't think they're what he would have made, but fine. It's okay. The charity exists. They are helping people. They're helping the world in his name. maybe it's good that not everybody knows his name, because he did have his issues in the past. Like I said early on, he was accused of sexual harassment. He did settle with no admission of blame or guilt, but you know that means nothing today. In the Me Too movement, they would probably crucify him. But he you know, you got to judge him by everything he's done, and he did a lot of good, and so yeah, I don't know. I just wish more people knew who he was, and there's a lot more to tell. One employee did write a book. Everybody who hears stories says, oh, you should write a book, you should write a book. It's a lot easier said than done, because books have to be more interesting, and no matter how interesting they seem, publishers or whatever want more. So one employee did write a book. It's called Martini Wonderland. It is on Amazon, I believe. This person who wrote a book was an attorney. He was one of the later employees, though. He didn't start with the company until maybe the last year or two of Mr. Frank's life. So he doesn't have nearly as much back material as other people would have. It is a fun read. I read it. You have to read it with a grain of salt. Half the stuff is just not true, whether he's remembering it wrong or purposely making things more interesting than they were. I don't know. But I would say half the stuff is wrong. There's a small portion of it that is completely, I'm not going to say made up, but is unprovable. He claims he had private conversations with Mr. Frank that no one else ever had or overheard. And I would say, in my experience, that would be damn near impossible to have. There was always somebody listening. There were always nurses. There were always baby monitors. There was always somebody or something around. He did not have private conversations. But I can't say for certain it didn't happen because I wasn't there all the time. So that part of the book, just take with a grain of salt if you do decide to read it. It does give a very good perspective, even if it's not 100% true, on what day-to-day life was like at the house. He creates some rivalries that did not really exist, just to make the book interesting, but fine. And then he's quite critical of Mr. Frank's family, his children, and how they chose to do things after Mr. Frank passed away. A lot of that is unfair, but it's his opinion. So I don't endorse the book, but it is the closest thing you can get to a book as to what life was like in as an employee of Mr. Frank directly. And it is a interesting read, a fun read, even if it's not perfectly accurate. So if you're interested in reading more, I would say check out that book. Martini Wonderland. I'm not mentioned in the book, thankfully, which is fine with me, because nobody mentioned is mentioned in that great of a light, except Mr. Frank himself, and of course the author. So, Anti-Tracker has come to the stream. No point, Joe is never going to see this. Rip Kronos. Well, let's see. What did Anti-Tracker Trey say? Oh, there's a lot of comments. What did I... Oh, Kronos asked, what did I miss? Kronos, I really hope you will go back and listen to this stream from the beginning. It is my dedication to Sidney E. Frank, a man we lost 13 years ago today. He was my boss. More than that, he was my friend. He was a mentor. And he was a very, very philanthropic man. He was a billionaire. He died with $2 billion in the bank. And he left half of that to a charity. And half of that went to the taxes to pay to make sure that his company, the Sidney Frank Importing Company, could live on, because at the time he died, the inheritance tax was still like 50%. Had he lasted another couple of years, the inheritance tax was down to 0 for 1 year, but he didn't. So literally half, they had to pay $1 billion in taxes just to keep the company going. And the company kept going. I kept working at the company until 2009, when I got sick. As people like to ask, my job went from an A++ or an A+ job to an A job if I had to give it a rating. Working for Mr. Frank was more fun. There was so much unpredictability and unlimited checkbook, more or less. You know how you say you can have things done quick, cheap, or right, or good, and you get to pick two? Well, Mr. Frank's 2 was always quick and good, and not so worry about the cheap. And I liked working under like that. It was well for me. Okay, so yeah, there's way too much in the comments. I'll go back to it in a minute. So that's where we are. Remember Sidney Frank, he has a Wikipedia entry. It's mostly accurate. Some things probably aren't perfect. There are some great articles that talk about what it was like when these people met him for the first time. And it's a shame. It was a great company. The company continued. Like I said, I was working there till 2009. I got sick. The company continued until a couple of years ago, when it basically broke up. the German company Mast Jägermeister that owns the Jägermeister brand, that was by far the biggest brand that was being imported at the time, bought the company outright. So all the other brands the company had imported had to go to other places. So a lot of the top talent left to go with those other brands. Many of the rank and file people were kept for a year or so at least before Mast Jägermeister started making changes. They completely moved the building. They left the building the company had been at for decades in New Rochelle and moved it up to a much nicer building in White Plains. But it was a complete change in corporate culture from what I understand from people who work there or still work there or worked there until recently. It was not the company that Mr. Frank left anymore. It's not even the company that the person Mr. Frank put in charge left anymore. It is a very different company. And that more than anything makes me sad, because, going to be honest, I've had recurring dreams ever since I got sick that one day I was going to go back to the building, and even though I might not have worked there for 10 or 15 or 20 years, I expected to see more or less the same building I saw, and some new faces and some old faces, and that I would get some closure. Because remember, I left one Friday with all the expectations of coming back to work on Monday, and I never got back. I had stuff all over my desk. I had files open on my computer. I had tons of pictures, of documents, of things I would have copied over had I been thinking ahead. Lots of stuff in my office that they eventually just boxed up. I got a handful of little things back, but the majority of stuff I think has probably just been tossed or picked up by other people. So yeah, it's sad. It's one of my few regrets that I will not be able to go back to 20 Cedar Street, where the company had existed for years and years. And even if I got healed tomorrow and could walk, there's no place to go back to. The company as it exists now would be unfamiliar to me. I wouldn't recognize the people who run it. They wouldn't know who I was. I'd be lucky if I knew a handful of people there, and it just wouldn't be pleasant anymore. It wouldn't be fun. It wouldn't bring me any joy to go back to see what it's become. And then they killed the name. They took the name. They ran it as Sidney Frank Importing for a year or two, and then they changed it over. So the name is gone. Very, very sad to me. One day, maybe the Sidney Frank Importing Company will be resurrected. I hope so, but we'll see. Okay. I'm going to go back to the comments now. For those who were listening only to hear about Sidney Frank, feel free to stop listening to here. But for those anxiously waiting for me to await their comments, now's your lucky day, I guess. And man, are there a lot of comments. Is there still anybody here? Yes, we're up to 9 people watching. Wow, 13 likes. And 1 dislike. I want to know who disliked. Man up, and put in if you disliked. I'm not going to hurt you. I can't. I'm in a hospital bed. I can't hurt you. But I'm curious, why? Why would you dislike it? I'm pouring my heart out here about a man who passed away. Wow, I am still going back. Okay. We'll start here. Thomas Potts says Hillary didn't want Bill to see actually good-looking women. That was in reference to Bill Clinton getting to see Playboy for the first time in a while. Peter Quinn says, least his golf courses have not gone bankrupt. That they have not, Peter. The people of Aberdeen have a problem with 2005 Trump. Okay, I don't get the reference. That's Scotland. Scotland had a problem with Trump in 2005? Okay. Thomas says Scotland has problems with everyone. I honestly haven't been to Scotland, but I don't know. I'm going to stay out of that. Thomas says Trump, before he became racist, homophobic, and sexist. Yes, that was Trump 2005. That was the Trump who won multiple awards from the Rainbow Coalition, from Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson for outstanding work with the minority communities. Yes, that Donald Trump. That was the one. Not Orange Man Bad, Pete Derrick, or Russian bots. Thomas Potts says, do you have any pictures of you together? And right, I did answer that in the chat. I do have some pictures of us together, not a hell of a lot. You know, I never thought he was going to die like that. I always thought there would be more time. There are a few where I'm in the picture with him. I don't believe there are any pictures of just me and him, but there are pictures where you can see I'm there. There are some group pictures where there's a whole bunch of us. Maybe I'll try and bring one up. But yes, there are pictures with me and him, but not of me and him alone that I'm aware of. Bulletproof car, yeah. In his later years, he was getting a little, I don't know, paranoid, but honestly, you know, after the terrorist attacks and everything, he was concerned and he wanted to bulletproof his cars. So he had the Maybachs bulletproofed. You're sorry for me. He must have been a good friend and mentor. He was. Anti-Tracker just got here. Who is Sidney? Well, Anti-Tracker, I will play the videos again at the end. But Sidney Frank was my boss and billionaire. He was on the Forbes 400 richest people until he passed away January 10th, 2006. He was a tremendous philanthropist, donated hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to causes and people, most of it to Brown University, but he donated big money to his high school. He donated to schools around the neighborhood. He had a skate park built in New Rochelle. If you Google Sidney E. Frank, you will see the Sidney E. Frank skate park. He was a big giver to law enforcement. He gave to lots of charities. He saw a movie about the Americans who became pilots for the British in World War II, before America entered the war. There were Americans going over to fly planes for the British to fight the Nazis, and he decided to take them all to London on his dime one year, and they all went over, the ones who were living and were capable of flying, making the trip. They went with their loved ones, and we took them around to the places. They had just christened a new Battle of Britain monument that Mr. Frank was a major donor on. He met Prince Charles. Funny story. Prince Charles apparently owns a cracker company. Crackers, or biscuits as they might be called in the UK. Anyway, Prince Charles gave Mr. Frank a bag of biscuits, or crackers. And we were at this hotel, the Mayfair. No, Mayfair was the city. Claridge's in Mayfair, London. And he had a big suite. It wasn't the biggest suite in the hotel, but it's a suite that he always used to stay at. And the suite had a safe, and of course Mr. Frank had a lot of cash with him, being he was traveling, and the safe was filled with cash, literally filled with cash, until he got these crackers from Prince Charles. Because they were a gift from the prince, Mrs. Frank insisted they be put in the safe. And so they actually had to take money out of the safe to put this box of biscuits in the safe. But what Mrs. Frank didn't know was the same exact looking box of biscuits was in every mini bar in every room in that hotel. And while I do not endorse it, it was hilarious to see people pull out the box of biscuits and start eating them in front of Mrs. Frank. And she went crazy, upset. The first thing, where did you get those? She thought they were eating the biscuits the prince gave Mr. Frank. And you had to be there. You had to be there. But yeah, suffice to say, the biscuits that the prince gave him, I assume, made it back to New York. I don't know what they did with them after that. But yes, biscuits became more important than thousands of dollars in cash on that trip. He's not the original Godfather, Thomas, but he did have ties. That is my mother's cell phone, if you can hear that. He was called Bird of Prey 1. No. So that's the guy Bird of Prey replaced. Got it. Nice to see you, Anti-Tracker. Right back at you, bots. A bunch of hellos. Anti-Tracker's working on my next video. Just had lunch with Reality Strikes. He was passing through town. Oh, that's nice. Thomas Potts, is your back okay? Anti-Tracker, check Discord, please. Yes, I'm asking someone else's stream. Wow. A new low. Asking on my stream for Anti-Tracker to check Discord. He's not safe anywhere. Yes, Anti-Tracker's back is okay, much better than the other day. Anti-Tracker says, worse than Anti-Tracker's back has ever been by Hey Now. I never said I could get out of bed worse than Bird of Prey 5. I wasn't sure if you were going to be here for that one, Anti-Tracker, but I stand by it. It was pretty goddamn bad. Thomas, especially since I was 20 years younger than you, so it made it worse. Thomas Potts. Breaking news. Unidentified body found on 5th Avenue in NYC, wrapped up with a bow. NYPD investigating. I have absolutely no idea about that. Mr. Miles, Chief Engineer. What have I missed? Start over. Very well, Mr. Miles. For you, I will absolutely start over. Just go ahead and wait 10 minutes or so and press the refresh button, and I will absolutely start over from the beginning. Have my word on it. Anti-Tracker says, breaking news. NYPD has stopped investigating. When asked, a spokesperson said, I was told nothing to worry about. That sounds more like it. Mr. Miles says, stop breaking the news. CNN from Thomas, CNN breaking news. Mr. Miles receive a wrench on the next Anti-Tracker channel. I see what you did there, Thomas. Fake news. CNN. Very clever. Mr. Miles says he will one day. Anti-Tracker says by accident he slipped and accidentally hooked up a converter box to the hotel system. Yeah, it more or less was by accident, because I was figuring out a way to hook up a projector to the hotel system, and the only way to do that was with a converter box with an AV out that I could hook up to the projector, and by accident I kept going through the channels, and I noticed, hey, these channels have premium movies on them, and these channels have hardcore pornography. So yes, it was by accident, and it turned out it worked at just about every hotel I went to thereafter. Thomas Potts. Peter Quinn says, see you tomorrow. Great to learn of Mr. Frank, but have to go moderate. Okay, Peter, take care. Thanks for coming by. Thomas Potts, is anyone going to watch Project Blue Book? The pilot was interesting. Yes, Thomas. I DVR'd it. I watched it, some of it last night and the rest of it this morning. I like it so far. I see Nerdrotic did a full review of it, but I haven't watched the review yet. I was waiting to watch the episode until I watch his review, so I'll probably check that out later today. Anti-Tracker says, Mr. Miles, you will be happy to know the first thing tomorrow will be Stargate SJW. Mr. Miles says, wait, you watched Star Trek Origin then? Chief Cook, hi. Obviously, no, he just means probably season 1. Anti-Tracker says, not yet, but try to remember Children of the Gods went. Mr. Miles says, I'd take advantage of a butler. Yes, a butler. Well, don't take advantage of him like that. Yes, he's starting his reviews. Did the stream just freeze? I hope you know to refresh it by now. If it did, Anti-Tracker. What's he talking about? Total nonsense, Chief Cook. Don't worry about it. I'm serious. Refresh it when you get a chance. Mr. Miles says the stream is going for me. Anti-Tracker says he's talking about Bird of Prey 1. I wish. Mr. Miles, Chief Engineer. No, I've never heard of the Final Cut version. I'm not sure. I must have missed something. Derek says, been to shop and back. Bird of Prey is still going strong. Yeah, this was a story of love, Derek, of deep emotional connection for me, and I wanted to do my best to tell it. I'm sure I'm going to think I could have done a better job, but at least I got some part of it out there. There will be more in coming days or weeks. Mr. Miles says the final cut also has full frontal nudity. Oh, right, because that's when Stargate was on Showtime. Anti-Tracker says, well, it's depending who's naked. Very true. Very true. Some of the dialogue has been edited too. Chief Cook, is that the guy who on Star Trek who passes this week? No, Chief Cook, this is my old boss, Sidney E. Frank. Miles says to Anti-Tracker, the female officer in the final episode, the blonde chick we never see again, her. And then later Daniels, I think. It's been a while. Anti-Tracker, final cut isn't important to your review of the first episode, but it's worth checking out all the same. Or save it for another time. Anti-Tracker says he's not going to worry about it now. After all, if Joe does not finish blathering on soon, I am never going to get my work done anyway. Thanks, Anti-Tracker. Thanks. Blathering on. I'm pouring my heart out here. Trying to have an emotional moment. Blathering. Okay, I'm going to skip the Stargate comments. Work, you're on vacation, says Thomas. Anti-Tracker says, my vacation is spent working on YouTube stuff, mostly behind the scenes stuff, but get some stuff organized. Derek says, Bus Man Holiday Tracker, Busy Man Holiday Tracker. Thomas asks Anti-Tracker if he's streaming normally tonight. Anti-Tracker says, how was... Chef Cook asks Anti-Tracker, how was the Bumblebee movie? Right, because this is the place to ask. Mr. Miles says AT isn't allowed to go on vacation. If he does, someone might get in his super chair. Kronos says, hey, Bird of Prey, what did I miss? Oh, man. You missed a lot, Kronos. You missed a lot. Anti-Tracker says, and Bumblebee was good. He gives it a 7 of 10. Mr. Miles says, watch the People of Earth trailer. You ugly bag of mostly water. Kronos says, anyone get offed yet? And Mr. Miles says, yes. See that guy in the background? He's the Godfather. Not anymore. Kronos, Thomas Potts says, who is Kronos? We know who Kronos is. Okay, let me read through the comments without reading every single one. Kronos, so yeah, Joe was talking about the man that we lovingly call Bird of Prey 1. He's not been convicted of any major crimes. Well, that is true. There is a couple of brushes with the law I could get into, but not now. Kronos is still wondering where Anti-Tracker is. Is it an Anti-Tracker from NYC? Is there more than one Bird of Preys? Well, Bird of Prey 1 died some years ago. You see, according to your family, if you do not take the Bird of Prey name until the prior Bird of Prey is gone, that's some weird canon you're thinking up, my friend. So when Joe goes, someone will be bird of prey 6. Anti-tracker. Ah, they're like Wayuns. Yeah, I suppose that would be something. Anti-tracker says, don't worry, where he's buried means at the bottom of a river normally. I did not mean it that way, though it is funny that you pointed out. That's exactly what it means, says Mr. Miles. Thomas Potts says, I've been on for about 45 minutes or so. Derek says, Joe is trying to do Doomcock length stream. Am I closing in on a Doomcock length stream? We've passed 3 hours. I guess I am. Find a grave burial location unknown. He might be buried in a private location. It's something like that, yes. Anti-tracker, that's only 5 minutes on his clock. Very true. I meant 5.2 bird of prey minutes. The company equals the family. Oh, wait. No, it's only about 2.2 minutes, so 18 minutes. Do Klingons have a mafia? Very interesting question, Kronos. I suspect yes. Master Miles says yes, it's called the Empire. Anti-tracker, I was going to say, well, he knew you, so I figured he must be a good guy. Yes, very true. Only good people know me. Kronos, is that the order? Perhaps a syndicate? No, but no point since Joe is never going to see this. Man, I felt like I saw that 20 minutes ago. Maybe it was longer. 3:07. 3:42. Oh my God. 30 plus minutes behind. Oh, wow. People, stop commenting. Please. I gotta finish this. Unless it's very important. Wow, still alive, but bad. Lucky, bang, bang, bang. You skipped like 500 comments? Well, yes, but then I went back. Anti-tracker, sorry, Kronos will not be listening. He is dead now. He took care of him, boss. He was asking too many questions. Oh, man. They are still looking for Bird of Prey 2, 3, and 4. 5 was the only remaining successor. Uh-oh. Is anyone working on Anti-Tracker Wikipedia page? Anti-Tracker says, not that I know of. I will see the beginning for sure. Used it, but some YouTubers don't follow a schedule. I know I don't follow a schedule. I'm sorry. White Plains has nice buildings. How racist. Flushing Meadows is kind of funny as well. Anti-Tracker says he needs to go. I'm not getting work done because I want to listen to Joe. Dang you, Joe. Have a good one all. Later, AT. Okay, now he goes back to the comments. See you at 11. Get those 3D printers working. How's your lucky day? It was Kronos, rip Kronos. I did after you killed me. Then I came back and gave you a thumbs up. You thumb down me. John Mako. John Mako. Dislike. See, because I know somebody named John Mako. But I don't know how John Mako I know would know I was streaming. Is this possibly... Oh, it is! It is John Mako. I can tell because of your one video that you have. The one video you have is bowling related. So hello, John, Mr. Macko. Welcome to the stream. I don't know if this is the first one you've seen, but how are you doing? Hope everything's well. Hope the family is good. Of course, now I have to find my place back in the comments. Oh, John is mad I never got him a job there. It is true. John was one of my actual friends here in New York, and he used to always ask me to get him a job there. He's another engineer, but not electrical. In the beginning, I honestly thought I might be able to, when the plan was to hire 5 engineers, but later on they just did away with that. And I tried to find an opening for him. I really did. There was just nothing that fit him. So I am still so sorry about that, John. But I think your life, it didn't turn out so bad. You never know what might have happened had you been working there. I think you can forgive me at this point. Chrono says, by the way, moths are mafia? Moths are mafia? Chrono says, any English peeps here to fact check the cracker comment that they're called biscuits, or that Prince Charles has a cracker company? You can Google it. Kronos, you should have known better than to doubt the word of Bird of Prey 5. Rip. Kronos, you still here? Sadly, yes, says Anti-Tracker. He is not the original Godfather, but he has connections. You heard it here. Kronos says, so you like to crap on my dead body. Wow, just wow. Anti-Tracker says, a Bird of Prey 5, I can see why a really good super chat going on here. Anti-Tracker and Bird of Prey 5, I can see a really good super chat going on here. Oh no, he's catching up. Please increase. No, don't I'm going to just stop reading the comments and close it down. If I don't get to it soon. Clone of Kronos, blah blah blah. Word canon equal truth. Weird canon equal truth. Anti-Tracker can't handle 3 hours. Derek, this feels like a Doomcock stream. Remember, do not comment. Only important comments, okay? Thank you, Anti-Tracker, yes. Thomas Potts, okay, I won't comment on goddamn news. Now I don't know if I missed anything. Make that 4. How far down was that? Remember, we're not supposed to comment. I'm wholesale skipping comments now. Unless they look really interesting. I think we broke his brain. What brain? No, what is brain? You didn't break my brain. You broke my patience, which is quite difficult. Quite difficult to do. I'm caught up here. Is there anything about this stream that anyone wants to ask? I think John Macko, my friend John Macko, has left. Okay. I'm going to call it a day here, guys. It was a tribute to Mr. Frank. Every January 10th, I remember the events of January 10th, 2006 vividly. Mr. Frank's birthday isn't until October 2nd, I believe. So it'll be a while before there's a big tribute to him, but I will talk about this more. This was an amazing chapter of my life. I have great stories and plenty of pictures and videos about it. I think you guys will like it. I hope you enjoyed it. And hey, I'm wearing a shirt I wore 17 years ago, and it doesn't fit terribly. That's not bad, huh? Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, Anti-Tracker. I always forget that. Please, guys, this is still a new channel. If you like what you're seeing here, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And send it to your friends. Send it to somebody you think will like it or you think will care. It would mean so much to me to grow this channel. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, Thomas, feel free to comment. Yes, and watch Anti-Tracker's videos too. He's a good guy also. They're all good guys, but Anti-Tracker has the most subscribers of all of us, so. Take care. Feel free to keep commenting as long as the stream is open. I don't think I'll be on again today. I will try again tomorrow. Qapla. That means goodbye. Well, it means success.